Hey, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Regional District Board meeting for Wednesday, February the 9th. Confirmation of quorum. Call the meeting to order. Can I have adoption of public agenda, please?
Move adoption.
Second.
Lee and Evans, go. Any discussion? See none, I'll call questions. Anyone opposed? See none carried. No petitions or delegations, so adoption of the minutes for the meeting on January the 26th.
So moved.
Wally and Abram. Any errors, omissions? See none, call questions. Anyone opposed? See none carried. Any business rising from the minutes? See none. No public considerations. There's no notes of motions. Chair report. Just got a couple items. Last Thursday, sat on a Zoom meeting with the other mayors and regional district chairs for the island with Minister Osborne. And her main question was, as we're in our final I guess it's 9 months, 8.5 months now, what's our plan, our street priorities for the board? So I brought up, of course, our Connected Coast project, which is now laying fiber in the ocean. I discussed our regional transportation, which is on the move. And I said we are patiently waiting for more funding available for our Recreate project. Another item for directors, when you have time, have a look at our East meetings. I've been sitting in on the last couple. I just want to suggest to all the directors, just have a look at them, listen to them. There's lots of stuff coming to the board that might have some background information for you guys, everybody, to maybe understand the issues that'll be coming forward. That's all I got for my verbal chair's report. Motion received.
Mr. Chair.
Motion receive.
So moved.
Second.
Director Evans, second by Director Mogulf and the chair, and the Director Abram.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the report. I just wondered, you were talking to Josie about priorities, and you were talking about funding, you talked about Recreate, but one of the other major three that we talked to her about at UBCM was the Rural and Northern Communities Grant of $2 million for the outer islands. And did that get mentioned at all?
That item, and Director Abram is still in closed session.
Thank you.
Oh, excuse me. I'm sorry.
Okay, thank you.
There was one other point.
It was stuff,
that-
Director Abram, it was just stuff that we were to bring forward 2 items, and I squeezed 3 in my talk. That's all. It was just basically what we were up to, what we're doing.
Okay, the other thing I just wanted to ask is, you just mentioned that people should have a look at the EASC meetings for background, because lots of things are coming to the board. We also have the First Nations Relations Committee, and we also have, of course, the Municipal Services Committee, which sometimes has far-reaching implications for the board. So I think everybody should read all the agendas and have a look at them to be as informed as they can when they come to the board. Thank you very much.
I concur. Thank you. On report, anyone opposed? See none carried. Committee chair reports. First Nations Relations Committee. Motion to receive the report.
Motion receive.
Second.
Dr. Baker. Dr. Evans. And anything to add?
Sorry.
Seeing none, I'll call.
Sorry, Chair, I was just going to say I didn't second that one.
That was Colburn that seconded that motion. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, we'll make the correction. Baker and Colburn, thank you. Any discussion? Director Jules.
Yes, I just wanted to say I look forward to chairing the next meetings, and I'm getting familiar with the rules and procedures of chairing the meetings, and it's an honor to chair these meetings. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Jules, and you'll do fine. Don't see anything else. I'll call a question on receipt. Anyone opposed? See none carried. Next item, Municipal Service Committee, motion to receive the draft minutes for the January 26th meeting.
Motion to receive.
Director Baker,
Second.
Second.
second Director Wally. Any discussion? Seeing none, I'll call questions. Anyone opposed? See none carried. Next item, Strathcona Gardens Commission. Motion to read the draft minutes received for the special meeting on January 28th and the special meeting for January 31st.
Move to receive both sets of minutes.
Director Lee,
Second, Director Mogul.
Director Moglove. Any discussion? See none, I'll call question. Anyone opposed? See none carried. Staff reports, draft 2022-2026 financial plan. Motion to receive the report.
Move receipt.
Second, Colburn.
Director Lee, Director Colburn. On receipt, I just want to put a thanks out to Mike and the staff for the report and the work putting the budget together. And also thanks to the CEO and staff working with our area directors on their one-on-one meetings, discussing the impacts of their areas. So I think it was a well-done budget. And I think today we should be ready to go. So on receipt, in the ad, CEO.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, we have a presentation and I'm going to let Mike pull it up, and I am just going to speak to the first slide in there and then let Mike walk us through it from there. So give Mike a second to do that. So yeah, could you, Mike, if you wouldn't mind just flipping to the first slide for me, and I'll say a few things. Thank you, and then I'll hand it over to you. So quite excited to bring this budget financial plan to the board. I think in my 7 years here, this is our most impressive budget over real challenging times amongst COVID and all the challenges that we've had throughout it. So in accordance with the schedule that we gave you in, I believe, September, outlining the business cases, the one-on-ones with the EAs, the special budget meetings we held with the EAs, presentations of business cases and the impacts that we have now received in 2022, the assessments, and Mike has consolidated year-end numbers, and we have compiled our draft budget to present to you. So included in this, I tried just to consolidate the things we have in here. So we have the addition of the emergency. Everything you're going to see today is going to include these things. The addition of the emergency preparedness support staff, the First Nations coordinator, having that role go from part-time to full-time. Allocation of all the COVID relief funding we've got as per board direction throughout the year. We had, I believe, 2 different allocations of COVID money. That money got redirected through different services in the regional district, and we've embedded all those into this, the budget. All the EA directors' recommendations from one-on-one meetings and budget meetings. We had 2 additional on top of our one-on-ones. We've gone through the majority of what the board's going to see here. The EAs have already seen, but we've incorporated all those comments into that. And even from our last meeting, we had a few amendments on capital items and gas tax items that we've incorporated in there. All support for corporate admin, contract commitments that we have, budget-wide support for CPI adjustments throughout the budget. The 50,000 grant and aid in general government, the board recommended we include a line item in that. That is incorporated in the numbers you'll see today. Support for regional feasibility studies, fire, recreation, transportation. COVID's brought an increase to insurance premiums and cybersecurity that's embedded in this budget. This is our first full year of having our First Nations partner as being a full voting member of the board. The budget also supports a number of reserve funding, asset management, and grant applications. So all the grant applications that we have and the commitments that we have to make are also supported in what you see in these numbers. And again, support for directors, regular business of the board and functions to pre-COVID levels. So what you see here would be in anticipation of let's just say a non-COVID year for board events such as UBCM, FCM, as per regular travel expenses. If those didn't happen, of course, it would just get rolled over in a surplus in the following year. But kind of the long and the short of it, everything that you see embedded in these numbers has all of this included. So I think you'll be quite satisfied with it, quite happy to see the impacts to your areas. And Mike has put together a presentation. You'll have seen in the agenda that there's two kind of wholesome packages in there. One is the GL account codes for every line item within the regional district. And then Mike, building upon the financial award that the SRD has received on the preparation of last year's budget, Mike has built on that and has, let's say, a more intuitive, readable budget interpretation of all the services, functions, reserves, everything. And what we're trying to do here is to consolidate that all down in a short presentation to show you the impacts, talk about assessments. Everyone's always interested in that. And this year we have a unique narrative on tax shifts towards residential that we presented to the East directors a couple weeks ago. So that's my input. I'll turn it over to Mike and we'll talk about assessments, tax shifts, and the impacts to all the areas.
Thanks very much, Dave. So yeah, my portion of the presentation is going to speak a lot about the effect of the 2022 assessments and what we call the assessment tax shift. The board's well aware of the annual effects that the assessment brings, but I'll just take a moment to recap it for any of the viewers. So the assessment tax shift is essentially made up of two factors. The first is the assessment shift between the areas. So this is how much your total tax base changes relative to the rest of the individual areas. This will, depending on your rate of increase or decrease, it'll either shift taxes to or from your areas. The second portion above it, about it, is the assessment shift between each of the property classes. So as many of you know, there's 9 different classes out there, from residential, industry, and business. As those change relative to one another, you're either going to see a higher rate of growth or a lower rate of growth, depending on the relative change of the underlying assets. So yeah, just in summary, the number one affects the total tax that goes to your area, and number 2 affects how that tax is distributed on all your constituents. So this is the chart of the total assessment shift between the regional areas. This determines how much tax each area pays. KCFN is a bit of an outlier. I'm not exactly sure how BC assessment determines their data, but it won't have a material effect on the rest of the areas. So the regional average was 30.5%, and that's represented by that gray dash line. If your area is above the line, you'll have taxes shifting to your area, and if you're below the average, taxes will shift away. This is a table I made. It shows the effect of doing nothing. So there's a pretty big drastic increase between the assessment values this year. So if you were to charge or requisition $100,000 in each of the year, that change column kind of reflects the various changes, even though the requisition hasn't changed. So you see Gold River, Zavalis, areas B and C are all running higher, and then the other ones are below.
So if I might just jump in there, and what that is what we tried to give an example of is that, say nothing changed, the requisition was 100,000. So we collectively we collect 100,000, let's say in argument's sake, in the regional district, and in, just to use area A, because the assessments went up, went down. They last year on 100,000 would contributed 3,800 to that 100,000 pool, and this year 36. The opposite of that, area C, Jim, has had significant assessment growth, higher than the average. So let's say on $100,000 collected to the regional district on a regional service, Last year, that was 8,400 in total for your area. This year, 9,100. So just again, tried to show that if all things stayed equal and you collected 100,000, just how it shifts amongst your area based on your area's change in assessment. So, you know, again, like Mike said, if it stayed neutral. Now this changes every year, right? Assessments, you know, go up and down throughout the various areas. So this 100,000, if you will, it changes year to year on who contributes net what. And again, if you're right on the 30.5, you would theoretically stay exactly the same. You're a little bit low, your area would shift a little bit lower. You're a little bit higher, your area net would shift a little higher. This happens every year, out of our control. Just an example of how the changing assessments in each area affect that net total of what we collect in each area.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. And the next slide will actually show, we have these charts embedded in the document that shows each of the area, but this reflects how exactly your tax base changes from year to year. So in this example, you could look at the 2018 data, and 73% of all the taxes were absorbed by the residential class, and then moving it to this year, it's closer to 80%. So that's the annual shift that you see. I just chart the three main categories and group all the others into the other. But each one of you will have a corresponding chart for your area in the budget document you could look at. This slide represents the annual change in residential home prices. As you can see, they're quite significant. Again, KCFN is the outlier. On average, though, you're seeing a 42% uptick in all the residential values throughout the area. Next, so that was the end of the kind of the first section on assessments. For the next part, I was going to go through each one of the 10 slides for each area. Now, they're all very similar. They all tell a very similar story. So what I was planning on doing is just running through each, and then we could you know, circle back at the end if there's any applicable questions on that, on any individual one of the services. So just to explain the chart a bit, we have this gray, the main part of the chart that shows the year-over-year change as seen through a residential lens. So this is the impact to each resident. Over on this side of the chart, I just have the effects of the assessment shift measured out. So if we look at Strathcona Gardens, for example, year-over-year increase of $10, about 45% of that shift is due to just the way the assessment classes are working. And so we have it all mapped out there.
So just to kind of jump in, just to add some context to it. So for Campbell River, prior to receiving and when we call the shift in taxes, let's refer mostly to private managed forest lands. So there's been a shift from those lands onto residential. So when we consolidated the budget, we had, to the average Campbell River taxpayer, an increase of $1.49, if my math is right there. And then the tax shift come, of which 609 of that is just purely due to the provincial change in rates for the classes, which jumps it to 748. So what we had control of within the regional district, and when we look at the budget, it was two-year average home in Campbell River, $1.49. And net, what it results in is $7.58 when you incorporate that, the shift in taxes to residential.
Yeah, and then just to highlight the point again, this is just from on the resident side. If I was to run the same chart for you know, business, managed forest, or anything else, all the shifting would occur the other way. So Camp River, yeah, up $758 a home to about 408, just over $400 dollars. the total requisition increase for the area is 17,500. So that's the year-over-year increase to our total requisition. A typical home is going to see about, you know, because Camp River is so close to the average, they'll see a, you know, very small impact, and about 80% of that is actually just due to the assessment shift.
So again, just to put some of that in context, for Campbell River, who, you know, pays the lion's share of the requisition in the regional district, the net increase on the requisition for entire Campbell River is only 17,000. And when we look at that and trying to translate that into the impact to average home of their average tax bill, it is 0.16% increase.
Next, we have the village of Gold River, so a bit of a divergence here, but overall, the tax reductions in the various service are outweighing the assessment shift. So even though the assessment shift added taxes to them, overall, they're going to see a small net reduction for individual tax bills. So we estimate that'll come in about $37.18 for the year. The total requisition decrease is only about $764. And again, the average home is going to see a very small increase, and it would have been greater had it not been for the assessment shift.
But Gold River is actually a decrease. So there's a net requisition reduction in the all of Gold River of $764, and for all intents and purposes, the homes decrease 0.03%, or basically zero.
Next is the village of Sayward, and they were close to the average as well, so there's not a huge impact with the assessment shift, but it's there. On a dollar basis, on a relative value, is quite high, but again, we're going to see a small increase to each home. And the total requisition decrease was almost flat, it's down $117, and then there's be a very small household impact. So Tassus had one of the lowest assessment increases relative to everybody else. So they did have taxes shifting away from the area. Combined that, the residents are looking at a tax reduction for the regional district portion of their taxes. Overall, we're looking at about $1,200 less tax, which translates to a decrease for each home. And Zabalis was the opposite of Tassus, and they had one of the highest rates of increase for the municipalities. So they're going to be the most impacted by the new assessments, and we'll see a larger residential increase of up to $2.84 a home. That would bring the total to about $20, just over $20.
So if I could just, there's something quite peculiar about Zabalis, and we talked about it, electoral areas with Area D. In fact, if you look at, again, what the regional district's impact was going to be, you can see the tax shift is over 100% of what the increase. So we, in fact, would have had a decrease to the village's taxes, and yet the shift was more than 100% of that. So we were going to increase 2.8 for $2.84 per home. $3.79 that is due to the tax shift. So without the tax shift, they would have seen a reduction in it. And you'll see here in a moment, Area D is really been impacted by that tax shift as well, as I believe they're over 100% again of the increase.
And so next is KCFN. Again, they had the very large negative swing to their assessments. BC Assessment only actually tracks one occurrence or one property. That's the way they list it in the data. So I'm not exactly too sure of their methodology for coming up with these numbers, but I can calculate the mathematical effects of what I'm giving. So overall, the requisition is going down about $39, and again, it's a large majority of that is just due to the tax shift. Up next are the electoral areas. So a lot of the EA directors have already seen these charts. They've changed slightly from the first iteration. We've just done some spending updates and some other minor tweaks, but this was electoral area A, and we measure it in both Sayward and Cayucit. As a whole, electoral area was one of the lower rates of overall increase, but they have a large chunk of managed forest lands, which similar to area D, and the assessment value of that has dropped it. So while taxes have shifted away from their area, the changes within the individual tax categories have pushed a lot from all the other non-residential classes to residential. I hope that makes sense. And so we have a total decrease of about just over $28,000, but a typical home is going to see a relatively higher increase, primarily due to that assessment shift. For electoral area B, they had one of the highest assessment increases for any of our areas, so they're going to be the most affected by this shift. Area B is primarily residential, so there's not a big impact through the shifting in the individual classes, but it's there nonetheless and kind of stacks on top of the shift between the areas. So we're looking at a total requisition increase of about $33,000. And again, it's the actual impact for the home is a large chunk of it is due to the assessment shift. For area C, we have an increase of $20 per home, bringing the total to $508 for the year. Area C is much the same story as area B, where it's primarily residential, and it was mostly the shift between the areas that's driving a lot of the tax increase. Overall, it's going up about $40,000. So the average homeowner to see about 4%, and then over 100% of that is actually due to the assessment shift. And last but not least is area D, which is a very similar story to area A, as they have a lot of managed forest lands as well. Overall taxes are going down about 2.9%. However, the residences are going to see an increase because of the impact. So the overall requisitions going down about 102,000, and then the residents will see a increase. And again, this is due primarily to the classification tax shift from mostly managed forest to residential.
So Mike, you keep saying the tax shift. It's actually just an assessment shift.
Yeah,
It's
the
the
assessment
assessment
drives
shift.
taxes. So
Yeah,
whatever.
but
we're
it's only half the equation. And in the case of BC assessment, it's the whole impact. They have changed the assessment shift from managed forest to residential. Part of it, like 9% of area D's managed forests got shifted over to residential of the assessed amounts. But that doesn't mean the taxes are the same, because they depend on how much you're spending in each of the services.
Correct, and we're spending $102 less, but the residences will see an impact. So I'm not sure if we're saying the same thing or not, but
yeah, we're saying it's all the fault of BC assessment, and it isn't that big a deal either. 3.51 is not change in assessment is not that big a deal in area D.
okay. So just to summarize it all, our overall requisition is going down about 42,000, or it's about 0.33%. But as we primarily look at things through a scope of a homeowner and measure everything with the residential impacts, you're going to see a positive amount there. And that's pretty much what I had for an overview. So I'll turn it back to the chair, and we could discuss what you like.
Okay, questions, Director Abram?
Thank you, Mike. Thanks for your presentation, very well laid out. I cannot for the life of me understand the tax shift in general, but specifically on the forest issue. Why is the forests of the Strathcona Regional District and everywhere, I guess, being shifted, the taxation on them being shifted to residential, when right now, timber prices are at the highest they have been for years. And yet at the same time, the taxation that's going to be derived from that is not being, as I understand it, figured into the equation to pay to the provincial government, but being shifted over to residential taxpayers to pay for them. I don't get it. This was done as a sort of similar situation, but not quite. It's similar. The industrial tax base many years ago, when the mill was operating, the mill constantly came to Campbell River Council and said, we need you to lower our taxes. It's too much. It's too much. So they kept shifting the tax base at the mill from the industrial taxation bracket down to the residential tax base in order to keep the mill there. And, it was a good decision on council's part. But at the same time, the people that are most able to pay in this situation, the forest industry, are having that transferred to the people that are least likely to be able to afford these increases, especially this year before, because of COVID and all the other things that people have faced. I don't get it. What's the deal? Why is there a shift? Question number 2, real quick, is can we, at the AVICC, UBCM level, lobby the provincial government to reassess the assessment authority manner in which they assess properties? There's something wrong here because they just aren't working.
I think I can answer both of those quickly. Is the first one, great points, Director Abram, completely out of our control, though. We don't set or have any control over the tax rate set by the province on that. So I'm not saying it's not a good argument, but it's nothing we control. It's not like the municipality and we can juggle it within the city. So, there's just nothing we can do about it. And B, yeah, you're absolutely able to, if it's the board's will, to lobby at AVICC, UBCM, or anything like that. But, we tried to show this to you to give you some leverage if folks are, I personally think the numbers are quite good, but if you want to help explain this to folks, that we've given you the information to assist in that and show where the majority of these increases has come is just this shift in rate, and there's nothing we can do about it.
And we're going to need that as individual directors in speaking to our constituents, because I'll tell you, I followed this very carefully this year, trying to understand it, still can't understand it completely. And I'll bet you that, probably 80% of our communities are not going to understand it. And we're going to require the expertise of our staff to simplify it and explain it so that people can figure out what's going on and who's to blame. Because it's not us. That's for damn sure.
Yeah.
We all realize that. Go ahead, Mike.
I was just going to throw something in there that technically as far as the assessment shift, it's not actually BC assessment moving dollars from one class to the other. They reflect that what happens in the market. So your residential assessments are up 40% because the market participants en masse are deciding to pay 40% more for their homes. That's nothing really to do with BC assessment. They just look at the market. If you were to look at any realtors numbers, sales numbers, or anything else, you're going to see 40% increases over there too. So BC assessment is just reflecting the market. So if you look at any one areas, the average business, or what the assessment data tells me is the average business owner is willing to pay 20% more than they did last year for a new, business plot. But as far as a homeowner, like I say, they're willing to pay 30 or 40 or 50% more. So because of the market participants' actions, that's what's causing the shift in between the assessments. So whether or not you could lobby them to change the methodology, and I don't know if that would go, because it's like I say, it's the market participants driving the change as opposed to
If I
BC
could just
assessment.
interject one last little comment. It is market driven, but right on my tax bill this year, my assessment bill this year, it says there have been no sales of a property similar to yours in the last 3 years. So this is not a market comparison. Used to be, but it isn't anymore. And they're just grabbing straws out of the air.
Yeah. Well, they do know that all houses in general are selling for a significant increase over last year. So I think that's how they make the make that conclusion. I'm not sure if you're in like for example, a 3-bedroom house, there's thousands of 3-bedroom houses selling throughout BC. So even if there's no comparable directly in your area, they still know the market as a whole has gone up 40%. So without any other data, they would just introduce a 40% to your property as well.
Okay, so let's move on. Director Anderson, then Director Lee. Director Anderson, go ahead.
Thank you. A few details and then a higher level question. I really appreciate there being budget detail this year. Last year, for the first time, I couldn't support the budget because I didn't have that. So I really appreciate that back. And Mike, I appreciate your reserve summaries in every service. What I would really love to see for future iterations, and perhaps you can send me for this year, is the actual reserve budget detail. Like I remember in previous iterations receiving a VADM sheet for each reserve, and then I can really track where the contributions are headed and if I need to increase them. So that's something that I would love. On the individual service pages, there's a little graphic that's incredibly useful that I would love to see at an aggregate level. So in every function, you've got a tax requisition and rate per 100,000, Mike, that shows over the course of the last 5 years, perhaps a budget in a service might increase ever so slightly. But because the tax rate is going up, the actual requisition per 1,000 is going down. That's just a super useful graph, but I couldn't find an equivalent for a municipality or an electoral area as a whole, or even the regional district as a whole. And I wonder if those are numbers that you couldn't send me now and potentially include next year. At a detail level, there's just a little bit of a mistake in the annotation of in the Cortez Fire Service and in the Cortez Park Service. Not a number error, but just in the annotation on page 104 of the Cortez Park Service, there's Area B Parks land acquisition, 50,000. That's correct, but under it says replacement of bridge in Carrington, so that's just a cut and paste error to clean up. And then in the Cortez Fire Service, there's some reserves put forward for a project. It's called a generator project, where it's not actually a generator installation. It's more a comprehensive energy systems upgrade. So if that could just be noted, that'd be great. And then at a high level that's more relevant to the whole board, I was looking over the strategic plan that is at the very front of this budget, and I appreciate that. And a lot of the things in our strategic plan don't necessarily require budget allocations. They're things that we're working on generally and advocating for and looking for opportunities, etc. But one of the my rooster in the background, one of the priorities that we had outlined that I think is worth some budget consideration is, quote, support adaptation and mitigation of climate change through local and sub-regional initiatives. And I'd just love to hear if there was any consideration from staff about ways of resourcing that strategic priority through the budget. I know, for instance, that on Cortez, and I doubt we're the only place, there's a group actively working on a climate action plan. I know that's certainly the case for Quadra and probably other communities as well. And I wonder if we couldn't add, picking a number out of a hat, I don't know, 50,000 or so to this budget that would allow those community action initiatives some support funds for their work in the absence of our doing it at a regional level. So any response to that, and I might make a subsequent based on that.
I can answer the first couple if that helps. First of all, yeah, the budget document itself is really designed to be, kind of a higher level summary. But if at any time any of the directors want additional information, the detailed nitty gritty, I already have a lot of it actually ready. So very happy to share that. As far as the rate per 100,000, it's really difficult for a regional district to do it because you have a different tax base and different effects in each service. So for a municipality, for example, they have one tax rate, one area, they can tax everybody and they can kind of compute a mill rate. We can do that, and we do that individually for services. But if we were to start adding all those together because of the different tax base, it doesn't really reflect kind of a true number. So the best measurement we have for consistent measurement is really the year-over-year change to requisition. But I am glad you like those charts. It's kind of a quick synopsis to give you kind of a a 5-year overview at just at a glance for any service. So yeah, if you have any feedback or any of the other things or any other comments on any individual content, just send them my way, and happy to modify the draft. And yeah, there are a couple of typos and other blemishes I won't point out that I've already caught, scheduled for correction, so I could do that. And then as far as the allocating based on the strategic priorities, I could let Dave handle that. But yeah, anything from the board that comes my way, I'm happy to put it in.
So I think as far as adding stuff or taking stuff out of the budget now, we've had many meetings over the last couple months, and to bring something to the table now, I think, maybe it's the wrong time. If you want something in the budget for next year, I would talk about it then, but not now.
So again, Mr. Chair, again, started this process in September. We've had business case meetings with the board, the individual committees, commissions. We've had additional financial budgeting meetings with the East directors to consolidate this with the intention of basically, if the directors look at this and say, is that number palatable with adding things throughout the process. I think the intention at this point is if the number was too high, you'd say, can you reduce it? I think it's kind of late in the game, as we have not received any communication from any director about, let's say, adding $50,000 to a climate. Not to say that we can't do that, but gosh, we've had a lot of meetings for this to be brought up and it has not been mentioned. It seems quite late to do this. And all the numbers you've seen here, we can make the modifications. We can delay bringing you a draft bylaw by a couple weeks so that you can see the impact, but this has not been brought up at any of the East or additional financial meetings.
May I, Mr. Chair, just speak to that?
Go ahead.
As far as I understand, this is our first opportunity. We, in the fall, as a board, had business cases brought to us, which were staff recommendations of things to change in the budget, and that's great. Since then, we've had East discussions, which have been very generative. Two additional meetings over last year's process, which was very frustrating, and it's been great this year. My understanding is this is the very first time the board as a whole has seen the budget with the numbers in it for this year, with the assessment information, et cetera. And this is the very first opportunity that I'm aware of where the board has been able to say, let's modify this particular budget item, because we haven't seen it previously. So I'd really rather not get back into the gripey version of me that was last year at the budget around process, but I'm not aware of another opportunity where the board has had this information in front of it and been in an empowered place to suggest changes. And therefore, the earliest opportunity that isn't ESC, because this isn't an ESC issue, I'm bringing forward a suggestion that is in support of our strategic work and asking before, making some bold resolution, I'm asking from staff if there was any consideration around supporting that particular strategic item. And if not, wanting some discussion at the board at what I see as the earliest opportunity to do that. Thank you.
Okay, so what I would suggest, Director Anderson, is once we receive the report, if you've got a resolution, then we'll put that on the floor. Okay, thank you. Director Lee. You muted, Brenda.
I would just like for the SRD to make it clear to the public that just because there's been an assessment shift, and just because your assessments for your residential portion in the electoral areas went up quite a bit, if they went up, in my area, assessments went up an average of around 45%, I think it was. So if everyone's assessment went up at the same rate from BC assessment, that means that the tax rate that the SRD sets for each of the 43 services that we have will go down. And the tax bill is a reflection of the assessment times the tax rates set in the SRD. That is your tax bill. So people should not be alarmed by the tremendous increase in assessment if it affects everybody equally that lives in the area. And that's what I've been trying to convey to everyone who asks me about and is alarmed about BC assessments. BC assessment notices that they've received at home is that it's not a major impact on the households in Area D because we're all shouldering the same burden. I do wish that the provincial government would review the policies that guide BC Assessment Authority's actions, because this market-based system of setting assessments is not applicable to most people. Most people like me have lived in their same home for 30 years, and we're not, whatever our house is assessed at or our property's assessed at doesn't mean much unless you're going to sell your property. Right. It doesn't mean very much. And they used to, the BC Assessment Authority, because I sat on the panel for property tax reviews before I became a director in the early 90s. I sat on the appeal panel for property assessments. And at that time, in the early 90s, people like the assessors would actually
Point of order, Mr. Chair, can we get back to actually the topic at hand, which is the actual budget for the SRD? May I finish, Director Lee? Very interesting comments. If I may finish, Director Lee.
Director Lee. You've got a point of order.
I have a point of order. And I have the right to finish my point of order. And then the chair can rule on my point of order. My point of order is, can we get back to the topic at hand, which is the budget, as opposed to the philosophical aspects of taxation, which is such a bigger picture. We could be here for the next 5 days. Thank you.
I just want to highlight sorry, Mr. Chair, may I speak?
If you have a question on the budget to Mike.
My question is, could the finance department please send out with the tax notices an explanation of how the shift in assessment and the increased assessment on residential would normally affect taxes?
We don't send out the tax requisitions. That comes from the BC assessment.
No, but you do send out notices with property notice. SRD does send out yellow pages.
We don't send out the tax notices. Sorry, Director Lee.
Well, you do send out a yellow notice. to the residents to explain our services and how people are charged for them, right? I get it every year.
No. I'd just like to point out too, I think BC Assessment has already done some
Yes.
preliminary work, and they have sent out notices, especially if anybody had a more of a drastic increase of their assessment. But it's kind of a hard thing to educate, you know, a large mass of people. BC Assessment was established in, like I said, it was 1974, and they've essentially done the same thing. You know, the whole time with the market basing and everything else, they have more tools now to refine that. But you know, the property tax has been, you know, it's been under the same construct for, you know, pretty much ever since it was invented. So it's always a difficult thing to try and, you know, explain to a broad audience.
Okay, thank you. I don't see any further hands up. So on receipt, I'm going to call questions. Anyone opposed? Seeing none, carried. And I have item B, that a bylaw to approve the 2022-2026 financial plan be prepared for further consideration at the February 23rd, 2022 board meeting.
So moved. Director Mulglove.
Director Moglove, and second by
Lee.
Director Lee. Thank you. Any discussion? Director Henderson?
Thank you. I did have a question that I would love an answer from staff as we're deciding whether we're going to move forward to the budget as presented. And that was there any consideration given to resourcing financially the strategic priority of climate support on a sub-regional and local level? And if not, is there I would like to have a discussion here now about that.
And no greater support than what we received direction from or what we have included in the budget.
Okay.
So I'm not aware of anything in the budget, and I looked specifically in that section around strategic priorities, the section 100, and I don't remember what, page 43. And I didn't notice any resourcing of that priority there. And in previous years, there has been a more detailed outline of how all of the priorities would be financially resourced. So I'm hearing that unless the board gives direction, that staff aren't suggesting how we could implement that strategic priority. And I do think that my memory of that strategic planning process was very much that we wanted, in the absence of us developing a climate action plan as a region, that we wanted to support more local and sub-regional initiatives to do so. So I would like to make a proposed budget amendment at this time, Mr. Chair.
Okay, so right now we have a motion on the floor.
I understand that, and I'd like to make an amendment to that, or as whatever procedurally you would like.
It would be amendment.
Okay. Let me just bring up my notes. That in our strategic initiative section of the budget on page 43, perhaps that could be brought up for consideration by the board as we discuss this, that we add $50,000 to this budget in support of community climate action initiatives.
Do I have a seconder?
Second.
Second, Abraham.
Go. On the amendment, discussion.
Could we see page 43 as we discuss it, please?
Sorry, that was the correct page. What?
Too small to see.
Page 43, I believe it was the strategic initiative section of the administration budget.
Oh, the administration.
Can it be enlarged a bit more, please? Thank you.
So I see here that there's money towards our unsheltered homelessness project, communication strategy, the gardens, COVID-19. But when I compare the budget commentary and service goals here to our strategic priorities, this was the one that really stood out to me as a strategic priority that could be very specifically budgeted and resourced for in support of existing initiatives that are happening in our communities, either that are undertaken by a municipality or a social profit sector or some combination thereof, that are struggling to find funds to do these climate action plans. And if we were able to put to get aside a very modest amount for a regional district of our size, that communities could reach out to the regional district for some collaborative matching funds to support their already ongoing work, I think that would be a very small way of leveraging excellent work that's already underway. That's all I'll say. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And Director Lee, you have your hand up.
Yes, I think that if we are committed to climate action, then we should have established a climate action committee that would oversee how any initiatives are implemented from our regional district. I'm not in favor of what Director Anderson's proposing, which is to just cast $50,000 out into the air for nonprofit groups to access funding, because to me that's just like grants and aid. There's no real control over how the funds are spent. If they decide, say, just an example on Cortez, if they want 20,000 to support the old growth, flying squad or whatever it's called, will they get that money? And how will they spend it, and how will it be accounted for? To me, it's too loose. It needs to have some serious policy goals and objectives through a committee from the regional district to control, not just control how it's spent, but to prioritize how we can best support the climate action, how we can best support it. Not just 50,000 thrown up in the air. I don't agree with that.
Okay, thank you. Director Baker.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I don't mean to be rude, but however, is there a way that, if possible, if the directors can actually just really just speak to the point and get to the point? This seems to be going a little longer than it should with the longer stories. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Abram, on the amendment.
Yeah, just a quick question. Didn't we have this year a strategic priorities session? In the past,
No, we didn't.
had them and we picked, I think, okay.
Director
So
Abram, we
that
didn't have
may
a
be
strat
part of
plan
the
meeting.
problem here. Okay, so may I recommend then that in the future, we have
No,
that schedule?
it's not. Speak on the amendment, please. Anything else on the amendment? Okay, seeing none. So we're going to call question on the amendment. The amendment is for the amount of $50,000. This is a weighted vote.
I did have some specific wording around that 50,000. Do you want me to put it in the chat? It was a motion. It wasn't just 50 grand.
Did you have this motion prepared, ready to go?
Put it in the
No.
chat. I did speak it out.
Okay, but when you put your motion out there, you didn't speak everything you are going to throw in there now.
No, it was very, very simple. That we add $50,000 to the strategic initiatives budget on page 43 in support of community climate action.
Okay.
Sorry, community climate planning. Yeah, planning action initiatives. My apologies.
Okay.
It's intended for plans, not flying squirrels.
Okay. Yeah, we've got it. Okay, so on the amendment, I'm gonna call question. Anyone opposed?
Lee,
Wally's opposed.
Director Mogul, I'm opposed.
Smythe opposed.
Kerr
Evans
opposed.
is opposed.
Evans,
Adams opposed.
Adams,
Smythe opposed.
Baker's opposed.
Baker's opposed. Unger's opposed. Defeated. Okay, back to the main motion. Call questions,
Andy, could
anyone?
you mute your mic,
Yep.
please? Thank you.
He's got her. Okay, so back to main motion. Motion. Anyone opposed? See none carried. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Mike. Next item, Quadra Island wastewater treatment plant grant application. Most received the report.
So moved.
Colburn,
Abram and Colburn. And anything to add, CEO?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. These are just, the program has been extended the deadline to February 23rd, and that's for, we had two applications in, one for Area C wastewater and one for Area D water meters. And they just need a change in the resolution to be more specific about funding, and the resolution that we have here will make the appropriate modifications and enable us to make those submissions.
Okay. On receipt, you have a question, Director Abram, on receipt.
Yes, I believe that's where it would be.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, so I'm not sure exactly what bylaw 391 actually says, because it's not clear where the money's going to come from. I understand it's loan authorization, but it sounds like basically that means it's going to be paid by the residents of the sewer district.
Okay, I'll go
Is
CEO.
that, first of all,
Well,
that's
it
the
would
first part.
have to be in regional districts, services have to be self-supportive. So any funds borrowed for that service would have to come from those service participants.
Okay, so that's the first part. I believe you've told me in the past that we can't stack gas tax on that. Is that correct?
We don't know what the contributions will be. All we have to do in this resolution is say we're supporting the contribution. There will be a portion, whether we can put some gas tax money in it or not, but there will have to be a community contribution at some level, and therefore the bylaws said we'll make that contribution.
Okay, so we'll make the contribution and we'll figure out what the details are later.
Correct.
Is that correct?
That's correct.
Yeah.
Okay. So then the next part of the question is that in the report, there's no, that's in the next one. I'm sorry. In this one, are there, besides the gas tax possible, we'll deal with it later. Okay, forget it.
Thank you.
I'm done.
Director Adams.
Thank you. Just a quick question, and I think you answered it with Director Abrams' question, but when I'm looking at item 3, the wording is cost overruns associated with the project by accessing Electoral Area D water system capital reserve be substituted. The language under item 2 is a little bit more vague, which I think is what the question was. What's the rationale that it isn't the same language that clarifies that the project overruns would be covered by accessing XYZ? Thank you.
I think it was just more by the ministry. They wanted us to be more clear and specific. So we're just trying to provide something that's suitable to them. But yeah, I think at some point we're splitting hairs over the wording.
My point is it wasn't clear to me reading this where that any potential cost overruns would be funded from.
Oh, they would be funded from the service. So the province wants a commitment that says, let's just say they're going to give you 2 million. If it's anything more than that, that you're going to pay all the cost overruns. They won't contribute to it.
Okay, thank you. And Director Lee.
Thank you. My question is about ineligible costs. So we submit the grant application for X number of dollars, and if the provincial government decides that we're only going to get 50% of what we applied for as eligible costs, and Area D is already in the next number, Northern Area D universal water metering, we're already anticipating that our share of the cost, if we got the grant, would be $660,000 or thereabouts. But can the government change the percentage of grant we get so that that 660 might go up? Or is that 660 that we're going to contribute from our reserves? Is that going to be the top of is that going to be all we're going to have to pay?
Director Lee, I think you're talking about item 3, the Northern Area D
Yeah,
universal
but
water main.
I'm also talking about
So-
two, like if ineligible costs affect the Kwathiaski Cove wastewater treatment, I
Okay.
mean, both those applications have the same tenants
Same
applied
thing.
to them.
Okay, gotcha.
You wouldn't know until they awarded us the grant. The devil's in the details. So we make an application, submit our costs. They go through it. When they make the award, they would tell you what was eligible, ineligible, and still at that point you would have the option to accept it or not. But you won't know until there's an award.
Okay, so at the point of award, we can decide if we can afford to match whatever they're short. Okay.
That's correct, yeah. Okay. I think we're still on receipt, right?
Yes.
So on receipt, I'll call questions. Anyone opposed? Seen none carried. And item B, that the SRD 97021 be amended by deleting the words that the regional district commit its share of any ineligible costs overruns associated with the project, and that the words that the regional district is prepared to commit.
Abram. B.
Colburn, second.
Abram and Colburn, thank you. No further discussion. I'll call question. Is anyone opposed? Seen none carried. Thank you. Next item, number 3, Northern Area D Universal Water Metering Grant. Motion to receive the report.
Move receipt.
Director Lee. Director Wally. Anything to add, CEO?
Nothing to add, Mr. Chair. Same as the previous report.
Okay, thank you. On receipt, I'll call questions. Anyone opposed? Seen none carried. And on to item B. Need a
Move
motion to
B.
move?
Move
Move
B.
Director Lee.
Second.
Second Director Wally. Any discussion? Seeing none, thank you. All in favor, or sorry, anyone opposed? Carried. Item 4, First Nations Territorial Knowledge. Motion to receive the report.
Move receipt, Evans.
Evans.
Davis.
Davis, thank you. And CEO, anything to add?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Tom will speak to this for us.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The report or the matter of the First Nations Territorial Acknowledgement Policy was referred by the board back to the First Nations Committee to address the question of whether or not the term unceded should remain in the policy or not. That was done, and the report in front of you today provides information on what that discussion was at that committee. And so this is now back in front of the board to consider 2 motions that were left on the table in December. The first one being whether or not to remove the word unceded from the policy, and then following that decision to decide on whether or not to approve the policy that's in front of you. Thank you.
Thank you. And I have questions. Director Lee, did you have your hand up, or is that just for previous?
No, oh, sorry, I'll take it down. Sorry.
Okay, thank you. Director Anderson.
Thank you. My memory is when this last came up, some directors noted some inconsistencies in language throughout the report and the policy, and that Chair Cornfield of the committee was going to look into that. I'm just wondering if the committee was able to discuss that and whether the document we have in front of us is a cleaned up version or not. Thanks.
The committee, yes, this did absolutely go to the First Nations Relations Committee, and the issue was around unceded. And it was still the recommendation of the committee that the term unceded stay in the document.
And that wasn't the question. I'm aware that that was a specific issue, and I appreciate the committee addressed that. There was other members who had noted some other inconsistencies of language throughout the policy itself, and I just wonder if that got looked at.
There may be some housekeeping issues that were dealt with previously, but I think that the document has taken the comments from the board and the committee, and you have a clean version of what the recommendation is.
Joe and Director Abram. You read it, Jim.
Sorry? Okay, I'm not muted. Okay. So on the actual motion, is that what we're talking about right now? Or are we still on
No, we're on
receipt?
receipt.
Still on receipt.
Okay, I'll leave it till the next time.
Okay, thank you. So don't see anything else on receipt, so I'll call question on receipt. Anyone opposed? See none carried. And we got item B. That's
Moved by
Colby. Moved
Colburn.
by Colburn, second by
Wally.
Wally, thank you. And discussion, Director Abram.
Yeah, just, we did have quite a discussion about this as to the word unceded and using it in conjunction with traditional territory or whatever. My comment then is the same now. It's basically that traditional territory is, very easily defined. It's what is defined by the First Nation and the province as the traditional territory of any First Nation. The unceded part gets mixed up with the treaty process, which we shouldn't really be commenting on in this context. And it is a political comment as to whether or not that territory is ceded or unceded. So I said at the committee that I really felt uncomfortable entering into that political discussion, which is between the province, the feds, and the First Nation, not us. So I would vote against. I vote in favor of removing it.
Okay, removing is not on the table. Director Moglove.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I strongly disagree with the director, the previous speaker, Dr. Abram. The use of the word unceded in no way, shape, or form is a political issue. It is a statement of the reality of the situation. The only time that territory would not be unceded is when it has gone to treaty. Once land has gone to treaty, it will no longer be unceded. So by using the word unceded, we are simply recognizing the fact that these lands have not gone to treaty. We have one area that has gone to treaty, and there will not be used the words unceded. It will only be used in those areas that have not finalized their treaties. There are many treaties that are in motion or in process at different stages. Once those treaties are finalized, the word unceded will come off the table. This word unceded is hugely important to this process. And in my opinion, if it's not there, our policy will not be worth the paper it's written on. Thank you.
Director Moglove, Director Colbert.
Good afternoon, directors, and I would agree with Director Moglove. So in the actual policy that is in the report on page 2 of 2, under general section 2, it says on behalf of the Strathcona Regional District, I would like to acknowledge that we are meeting today on the traditional territory of. I believe that it's worded that way because we have both ceded and unceded territory in our treaty and unceded territory in our regional district. So I do think that unceded is a very important word. So anything that is not acknowledged and finalized under treaty retains that unceded designation. It's as simple as that. I think that this point has been belabored and discussed a lot at this board and in the First Nations Relations Committee. And so I will, it needs to remain in this policy in whatever form that is in. So anything that is not recognized as treaty lands is unceded. Thank you.
Thank you. And Director Wally.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would strongly disagree with Directors Moglove and Colburn. Our provincial negotiators don't use the word unceded for a very specific reason. We shouldn't use it either. That's all. Thanks.
Cool. Any other first-time speakers? See none. Director Abram. New information.
Just real quick, Director Moglove made my point. Anyone that is completed a treaty, then of course we say it's ceded territory, because it has been, if that's what happens in the treaty. But if it's in negotiation, then it's like in your court days, Director Moglove, there's alleged and there's saying something is true. And unless you know it's true, then it's alleged, not true. So this is the same situation. Well, hang on, Mr. Chair. I'm not quite finished. If that's the case in this situation, then it is political. It's in the treaty process. It's being talked about in the treaty process, and the provincial government is not calling it ceded or unceded. It's part of the discussion. Which is it? So we shouldn't be saying one way or the other.
Okay, so we've gone around the block a million times on this subject. We've listened to our First Nations coordinator who's talked to our First Nations. We've heard it from our director from Cayucet on the word unceded, and I see Director Jules has got his hand up, so go ahead, Director Jewell.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, I was just gonna say it feels like we're kind of feels like we're beating a dead horse here. This has been talked about over and over and over again, and it was brought to the First Nations Relations Committee. This was voted on, and I just don't see why it's such a big problem.
Okay, thank you very much, Director Jules. I don't see any further hands up, so I'm going to go question on the motion. The motion is that the vote be taken. Oh, sorry, that the term unceded be removed from the territorial acknowledgement policy. Do I have a mover?
So moved.
I think it's on the table from last time, so it's already on the table.
Yes, you do, sorry. Call question. Anyone opposed?
Evans
Director Moglove, I'm
opposed.
opposed.
Anderson,
Okay, hang on. We have to go slow.
Evans
Opposed.
Anderson,
Colburn.
Baker.
Davis.
Anderson.
Davis.
Jules. Baker.
Davis
Hunter.
opposed.
Davis opposed. Director Adams? Director Adams, you going to vote?
I think you've just asked for opposed, Chair.
Yeah, who's opposed? I've got Evans, Lee, Baker.
No, Lee's not opposed.
Okay, hang on. Evans, Colburn, Baker, Anderson, Jules, myself, Davis.
Am I on the list, Moglove?
Now you are, yes?
Okay, thank you.
Eight opposed, fail. On item C. That the policy
move
CPs.
C.
Sorry, that was Moglove.
Yes,
Second,
that was
Colburn.
Moglove, thank you.
Second Evans.
Colburn.
Colburn, thank you. Any discussion? Call questions. Anyone opposed? Carried. Item 5, service agreement, justice support worker contract award. Motion to receive the report. Moved by Adams, second by
Davis.
Davis, thank you. And I'll go CAO.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Renee will speak to this.
Thank you and good afternoon, directors. The contract before you was developed or was created to fulfill one of the activities approved through the UBCM Strengthening Communities Grant, which was awarded to the SRD last August to support those experiencing homelessness. The purpose of the program is to provide support to individuals navigating the justice system who are experiencing homelessness or at the risk of homelessness. The main priority for this position will be to help clients assess treatment, access recovery services, housing, and healthcare services. At the time of the application, there wasn't a host agency for this position, so it went out to RFP in December with a closing date of January. 2 proposals were received. A panel of 5 evaluated the 2 proposals. The Sassamans Society scored the highest, and attached to the report was a draft contract. And due to the value, the dollar value of the contract, it is before your approval as per bylaw 3069.
Thank you, Renee. Any questions? Director Julie, you still have your hand up? No, Director Abram?
Yeah, just 2 questions, quick questions. Is this all grant money?
Yes, it is.
Okay, and that's 1 year?
That's
or
right.
longer?
It's a 1-year pilot program.
Okay. And I know in the write-up, it mentioned people that were involved in the discussion, and it mentioned the directors, EA directors. So I'm just wondering, like it talked about municipalities, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, but I didn't see EA directors in there anywhere. This happens quite often where there's things that are consultations, but EA directors are not invited.
Sorry, I'm not sure what you're referring to in the report.
I'd have to go back into the report to find it, but without taking a lot of time, I'm hoping that I can find it real quick. It doesn't look like it.
Okay, if you're referring, the RFP was evaluated by a 5-panel person made of staff and people from the service agencies, not directors or elected municipal officials. There
Okay,
are
I
2
believe
members of our working committee, Director Kerr and Director Adams, who sat in on the working group that established the grant application last year.
Okay, well, maybe that's the part that I'm talking about, but there was some group that was talked about where it listed pretty much everybody that could possibly be involved except rural directors. So I just wanted to make a note for the future if there are these things being talked about that do affect us, certainly, and we will make use of. It would be nice if there was an EA director there, just like a municipal director.
Okay. I'm not really sure, Mr. Abram, you need to be more specific. It seems like you're providing advice and maybe criticism, but I have no idea what you're referring to.
Okay, well, it's not criticism. It's in reading what I read, there's someone missing. So
Okay,
I'm just pointing it out.
But
There's
you
someone
haven't
missing.
identified it, though.
Well, I can't open it for some reason. Okay, so if I could open it, would certainly find it for you very quickly, I would think, but it just does not open, and I don't know why.
Okay.
So anyway, just forget it.
Okay, thank you. Director Kerr.
Thank you, Chair. And just a question for staff. I think this grant is about halfway through its term right now. Is this just going to be prorated and for a half a year of operation, or is it going to extend beyond the life of the grant? Then I've got a comment.
Okay, thank you, Director Kerr. We did apply to UBCM to have an extension so that we could operate this program for 11 months.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I think there was an initiative called Situation Table that was floated, I think, by the RCMP out to the nonprofit groups. And, you know, it's my understanding that there was no uptake on that, which is a real pity, because I think the intent of the Situation Table was very much the same as this position, and it would have been a initiative that went on beyond the grant funding period. So I certainly hope that maybe this person will, you know, show the community that we can individually help these people that are suffering on the streets through the process and get them off the streets. Anyways, I'm hoping it's going to work.
Thank you, Director Kerr. Any further discussion?
Yes.
Director Abram.
Yes, I just wanted to tell you I managed to open it. And Dave, you wrote the report in the executive summary, paragraph 2, mid-paragraph. It says, the working group was comprised of nonprofit service providers, Vancouver Island Health Authority, the Strathcona Community Health Network, as well as staff and elected officials from both the SRD and the City of Campbell River. So my question was, who were the elected officials from the SRD?
That would be Director. That would be Director Kerr and Director Adams.
Okay, so Director Adams would be playing 2 roles there from Campbell River and SRD.
They're both board directors.
The point that I was making was there is no SRD electoral area director involved. And that's where it came from. Paragraph 2 on your report.
We're board of 14. Yeah, we're board of 14.
Pardon me?
Okay, I said we're a board of 14. So I'm going to call question on receipt. Anyone opposed?
Not
Seen
sure
none
what that
carried.
means, but anyway.
On to item B, draft service agreement for the Justice Support Worker be finalized and awarded to Sesame Society upon its response to RFP 1721, and the chair or corporate officer be authorized to execute contract.
I'll move B, Director Moglove.
Second, Director Coburn.
Thank you. Any discussion? Seeing none, I'll call questions. Anyone opposed? Seeing none, carried. Item 6, regional broadband last mile funding agreement.
Move receipt of the report.
Coburn, Adams, and I'll go to the CEO.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the board currently, or the SRD, has 2 partnership agreements for last mile in the regional district. One is for a group that has received grant funding from the province and the feds. Then that one was for Cortez Island, a small portion of Quadra and Zabalas. That agreement is not this one. We have another agreement that we refer to as an indebtedness agreement. That was for areas in the regional district that did not receive grant funding. So that would be Tassus, Gold River, a large portion of Quadra and Sayward Valley. So last year we entered a partnership agreement with City West is that we would borrow the funds to build last mile and they would make the debt payments on that. Since that agreement has been undertaken there, I've had a lot of discussion with City West is that I would still like to generate a dividend for our areas that we have last mile funds for. So City West was agreeable with that idea and we agreed upon a 5% contribution to the capital builds for last mile in those areas in exchange for a 20% annual return on the province for dividend for the services. I've presented to both Gold River Councils and Tassus, which they supported, and have had preliminary discussions with the area directors who are all supportive of it. So I would ask that we support the recommendation and amend the agreement to include both a 5% capital contribution to the builds that will enable us to receive an annual dividend on those communities.
Thank you, CEO. On receipt, call questions. Anyone opposed? Do you have a question on B, Director Lee, or?
Yes, I did have a question.
Okay.
It's
So
quick.
okay,
I
so-
just wanted to ask the CAO through the chair. So would this dividend come to places like Denman Island, or places outside of our regional district
No,
that
they have
didn't
their own.
contribute to the startup costs?
No, they all have partnership agreements themselves. So this is just for the 4 areas within the SRD. There is many communities that have signed partnership agreements to receive dividends, but they're making their contributions for last mile and have separate agreements.
Okay, thank you.
On receipt, Director Abram, or on B?
Yeah, actually, it's sort of a mix, but it's in the report on A, and it may just be shorthand by Dave that a couple of major places on Quadra, like it says, a small portion of Quadra received some money, and this was all related to the TELUS 5010 schmozzle that we went through. But the one that was not mentioned for sure, that has no service, is Surge Narrows. Like Granite Bay is mentioned, and then it skips Surge Narrows, and it goes down to Bull Point. So I'm just wondering if that was just, shorthand, you just moved on down the line, but Surge Narrows needs to be in that. And the other one coming around the bottom, no service, Lighthouse, Saukaloot Lodge, and Cape Madge Village, I believe they're going to be they're going to fall under that 5010 thing with TELUS. But going up the other side, Walcan was one of the landing sites, and Blind Channel was one of the landing sites. So all of those, I believe, received money from the provincial government. And correct me if I'm wrong, Dave, but I think they were considered part of the Quadra build. And if they were, then they should be in this written report so that for future reports, it carries them forward so that we don't lose out, because they're going to be part of the the payback or whatever.
Yeah, Rocio.
So there's 2 agreements, as I mentioned. The first agreement included Cortez, Zabalas, and a small area on Quadra. The small area on Quadra is 3 areas. I think it's Blind Bay, Open Bay, and one more small area. They are addressed in a separate agreement because we had grant funding for that. We made 10% contributions to that, and they're included in a dividend. The remainder in this agreement that the board has already endorsed, we have a bylaw, and it has a map that identifies the remainder of the area to be serviced is this agreement. So within that area, the build estimate is $5.7 million, and we will make a $285,000 gas tax contribution and receive a 20% dividend for that area as well.
Okay, but the Surge Narrows build should be in this agreement.
These are last mile agreements. These don't have anything to do with the landings or the backbone. These are last mile agreements.
Okay, so how are they going to be paid then? Like say Surge Narrows is just one example. How will it be paid if it's not written up somewhere that it's in the agreement?
The areas are in the bylaw maps. So in the first agreement, there will be a map that will encompass Zabalas. There'll be another map that encompasses the areas in Cortez, and there'll be a third map that encompasses the areas to be served, as we do all service area bylaws in regional districts. This agreement, which we already have this agreement in place, this is a signed agreement by the board, has identified the areas to be mapped and served. The only thing this amendment is doing is making a contribution so we can receive a dividend. Those agreements have been signed, the areas have been identified within them already. They have nothing to do with the backbone.
Okay.
These are last mile.
Okay.
Okay, so can you assure me though that the last mile agreements exist somewhere for Blind Channel, Surge Narrows, and the Lighthouse?
If you looked in the bylaw maps that are attached to it, the maps in that agreement identify the homes to be served in there.
Well, I don't have that in front of me because it doesn't come up on my iPad.
Can we call the question on receipt, please?
Are you clear then? You feel that those are all in there?
Question's been called on receipt.
Excuse me, Mr. Chair, I'm waiting for an answer from our
If you
CAO.
look at the bylaw maps, they will identify the areas to be served in the two agreements. This is not changing that. If you did not support this, then you wouldn't make a contribution, get a dividend. That agreement has already been signed. Those areas have already been identified as part of the bylaw and as part of the agreement. This is not changing that. So whatever those areas are, nothing is changing in there.
And of course, I am going to support it. I just want to make sure that there have not been a couple of places that have been dropped off for some reason.
Again, the
So
areas to be served are identified in the bylaw.
Okay, question's been called on receipt.
No sé cómo camina y se maquilla al mismo tiempo.
Mr. Chair, you don't seem to understand that, you know, this is our
Director Abram, I understand, and the CEO's answered you 4 or 5, 6 times now about it.
Al mismo tiempo.
So we're going to move on now. Question has been called on receipt. Anyone opposed?
Well, boy.
Excuse me?
Yes, I'm opposed. I'm opposed to being cut off on something that is so essential.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else opposed?
Been involved in this since day one.
Director
and now you're
Abram?
cutting me off.
Director Abram?
5,000.
We're voting.
Se preocupaba por
You
nuestras
voted. Anybody else opposed? Seen uncarried.
I am not.
Item
I'll
B.
move B to amend the funding agreement with City West.
Second.
Director Adams and Wally, thank you. Any discussion? Director Davis?
Yeah, I fully support this, but I just have a question regarding some of the wording. Let's see, it's 5.2C. Says in designing and constructing the last mile network, City West covenants to use exclusively fiber as the technology for the network infrastructure except if it would be commercially unreasonable to utilize fiber due to extreme geographic or topographic limitations. I'm just wondering why that is in there and what it could potentially apply to.
Yo saco la basura.
I wish I was there.
Sounds like you
Whoever
got
has the
too.
background in French, can you please shut it off?
Spanish.
Spanish,
Okay.
whoever it is.
Yeah.
Thank you, Director Davis. So that again was already in the agreement, and that's signed. That's not up for discussion, but it is a good question. I'll explain it. When we've gone to communities, we say we're looking to put fiber into the home and deliver fiber everywhere. As this is a rural project, there's the odd home that will have a 500-meter rock driveway, and servicing them maybe $75,000, where the average to service a home is around 5,000. So we have language in all our partnership agreements where it is commercially not equitable to do that. We will provide them a wireless solution. It's just too expensive for these oddball homes. And our goal is to fiber, we're using 95% of areas, just as a kind of high level to say, if we'd say every single person, then there's some guy that lives, in the rhubarb a few kilometers away, and it's going to cost us hundreds of thousands. That's just not viable for us.
Okay, my only concern is that Tassus is reasonably fully serviced. I do realize we do have a couple of rural locations, and I would assume it might apply to a couple of those under the terms you just mentioned. So
Yeah,
thanks.
it's just a caveat to cover our butt in case somebody, we have to drop $200,000 to bring fiber to one guy's house.
Okay, fair enough.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions on the motion? Seeing none, I'll call questions. Anyone opposed? Seeing none, carried. Under bylaws, first bylaw 452, Director Workshop Compensation. Motion to receive the report.
So
Member
moved,
State.
Colburn.
Second,
Colburn and Evans, I think.
Lee.
And I'll go CEO.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just quickly, this is just to
Not
clean up the
Evans, Lee.
compensation bylaw so that we can attend workshops without having to make them a formal COW or MSc or whatever they may be. So it just simplifies what we're doing anyways in the compensation bylaw.
Okay. On receipt, call question. Anyone opposed? Seeing none, carried. Item B, the bylaw 452 being a bylaw to amend the compensation provisions for original board be now introduced and read for the first time.
Move first reading.
I think it was Adams and I didn't catch the other one.
Lee.
Director Lee, thank you. Any discussion? Seeing none, I'll call questions. Anyone opposed? Carried. Item C, rules suspended to give second and third reading.
Colburn.
Colburn. Second.
Second.
Adams, any discussion? Call questions. Anyone opposed? Carried. Item D, bylaw 452 being compensation bylaw 2013, amendment 9, be now reconsidered and passed and adopted.
Move adoption.
Adams.
Evans.
And Davis, I think I heard. Any discussion? Call questions. Anyone opposed? Carried. And item E, the further report amendment bylaw to remove the obsolete provisions be prepared for the board's consideration.
So moved.
Lee, Adams, any discussion? Call questions. Anyone opposed? Carried. Bylaw 2 is 453 bylaw revision authority. Motion to receive the report.
So moved.
Wally
Second.
and Lee in the NCO.
Nothing to add, Mr. Chair.
On receipt, call questions. Anyone opposed? Seeing none, carried. Item B, the bylaw 453 being a bylaw authorized revision bylaws to the SRD be now introduced and read for the first time.
So moved, Colburn.
Wally and Colburn. Any discussion? Call questions. Anyone opposed? Carried. And item C, rules be suspended for the second and third reading.
So moved, Colburn.
Colburn,
Second.
Wally, Anyone
Mr. Chair?
opposed? Yes? Director Lee?
Just before I vote on the second reading, I just want to clarify and confirm through the chair to staff that this is only applying to housekeeping, minor revisions to the bylaws and not anything major.
Mr. Yates?
That is correct, Mr. Chairman. As a matter of fact, if this bylaw is adopted today, we intend to bring back a bylaw next meeting that will show exactly that.
Okay, thank you.
Any other discussion on C? Seeing none, I'll call questions. Anyone opposed?
Hand up, Mr. Chair.
Director Abram?
Yeah, just a quick one. We talked about it at the last meeting, and that was that in this revision process that the new bylaws will show through highlighting or some other means what is actually being changed.
Correct.
So that we can see what was there, what is being proposed.
Correct, sir.
So I'm hoping that still applies.
That's correct.
Great.
Okay, call question on C. Anyone opposed? Carried. And item D be finally passed and adopted.
Move D. Coburn.
Coburn, second.
Second.
Adams, any discussion? Seeing none, call questions. Anyone opposed? Carried. Correspondence, AVICC
Move
Earth
receipt.
Week.
Second, Coburn.
Second,
Coburn.
Evans.
Any discussion? Call question. Anyone opposed? Carried. No members, Motion down to T, closed session, report for CEO will be received.
Move
Move
receive
receipt.
the report.
Coburn and
Second.
Lee. Any discussion? See none, I'll call questions. Anyone opposed? Carried. And item B, the closed meeting be held for all the alphabet numbers down below.
Move to go in camera under the named sections of the community charter.
Second, Coburn.
Any discussion? See none, carried. Motion to terminate.
Move termination.
Wally,
Second, Coburn.
Coburn. Anyone opposed? See none, carried.
Okay, we leave this meeting.